What I'd like to do now is introduce everyone to Dr. Martha Burns. I've worked with her for almost 17 years here at Scientific Learning, and I learn something new every time I hear her present. She's a joint appointment professor at Northwestern University and has authored 3 books and over 100 journal articles on the neuroscience of language and communication. Dr. Burns' expertise is in all areas related to the neuroscience of learning, such as language and reading in the brain, the bilingual brain, and the adolescent brain, and the language to learning continuum. Dr. Burns is also a fellow of the American Speech Language Hearing Association and the director of neuroscience education for Scientific Learning. We also have Lynn Gover here to present for us today. She has been working now with Scientific Learning since March of 2012. She has worked at length with teachers, schools, and programs and is the mother of 10. She has previous experience in relationship partner sales in the software industry. So I want to welcome first Dr. Burns for about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll have Lynn Gover for the remainder of the webinar, and then we'll open things up for questions. So Dr. Burns, you're up.
All right. Thank you, Carrie, and hopefully you can hear me. All right.
Yeah.
We're welcome, as Carrie said, to auditory processing. It's a critical link to reading. Before we get started, it's always helpful for me and Lynn Gover to be able to know what your area of greatest concern is, and that way we can kind of gear our discussion to what all of you are interested in. So this slide just says, is your child's greatest or your area of greatest concern for your child with regard to learning frustration with school, trouble remembering school concepts, paying attention, or taking a while to respond to questions or understand his teacher or her teacher. So click on whichever one would you say is your greatest concern, and then as soon as you click that on, just click the Submit button. I will do the same right now, and we will be able to see what you have come up with. So among those that are listening to us, most of you, it's pretty even, but most of you said your child takes a while to respond to questions or to understand their teacher. So that seems to be critical. That was about a third of you. Another third said your child has trouble remembering or memorizing school concepts. That's pretty common with auditory processing disorders, both of those. Some of you said your child has trouble paying attention, and we'll talk about that, about a quarter of you. And then a few of you said that your child is frustrated with schoolwork. Now remember, this is your primary concern, so I realize that some of you may have a few more. So we will address all of these as we get going now. What we're going to cover is why your children struggle with specifically in these 4 areas: attention, memory, paying attention, and then responding quickly and easily. We're going to talk about what the research says about processing and what it is so that you understand its relationship to reading. But mostly what you want to know is what can be done about it, and we're going to talk about Fast Forward Home, and that's when Lynn Gover is going to come in and start speaking with us. So let's get started with the clues that let us know and kind of inform us as professionals and what you as parents can use and what teachers can use to determine if you think your child might have or a child might have an auditory processing disorder. Some of the most obvious signs of auditory processing disorders is that a child or a student in school misunderstands a lot of what's said. So you might be talking about something at dinner if you're a parent and your child misunderstood 2 or 3 words and thought you said something entirely differently. Or in a classroom, the teacher might be presenting information about something and the student might just totally misunderstand what the teacher said. Often, more often actually, in my own caseload, what I see and what parents will explain to me is their child asked to repeat things all the time. So they'll say, go upstairs, get your coat. I think it's going to rain, so don't forget to close the windows and grab your spelling homework. You don't want to be late for school. And then chop, chop, let's get going. And the child goes, huh? What? Maybe they head upstairs and just on the way upstairs they go, huh? What? So they're I sometimes say, and you can see that's under 4, they're a what or a huh kid sometimes. I say, is your child a what or a huh kid? Are they constantly asking you to reformulate? And as some of you said, quite a few of you, about a third of you said your child might give slow or delayed responses. So you might say, what did you do today at school? Tell me about school. And your child goes, and you almost think they're not going to respond. And you start to ask a question again, and then they start to answer you. And we'll talk about that and what that means and why that might occur. If they have trouble following directions, if you give them 3 things to do and they say huh or what, or they don't even say huh or what, they just don't do one of them or 2 of them, that can be a sign of an auditory processing problem. And also if they are passive. I used to be able to tell when I was in the car with my children, taking them to and from scouts or to and from activities after school, and there'd be a group of them, and if one of the children got real quiet when the other ones were talking and sharing ideas, and one child just kind of withdrew, that can be a sign too. Now, the question is, what does this all mean? And why is that what we're seeing? A few things for teachers, or a few things that your teachers might have told you if you're a parent, is that the student is not following their directions. They'll give clear directions about what they're supposed to do for homework, or they'll give clear directions about what they're supposed to do for an assignment, and that student will come up to their desk and ask for clarification, or they will miss it entirely and not get it done. If the teacher calls on them in class, those are students that are kind of sitting there with a blank stare on their face sometimes and need either the question repeated or just say, I don't know. These are students who are tuning out a lot, and that's the big key, is that auditory information is hard for them. It goes too quickly, it's too complex, they have trouble perceiving it and holding on to it, and so when listening is hard, what do? You tune out. If you ever took a course, any of you, in high school or college that was a little bit over your head, you know what I mean. The teacher's talking away and you're thinking, what is this? I don't understand this. Would they just slow down? Often that's what we see with an auditory processing problem. And when that happens, you tend to tune out. You just kind of go, this is too hard for me. Or you might just see that your student has trouble with phonics or reading or spelling. About a third of you said that's where your child seemed to be having trouble. And then occasionally you'll have students that act out. School is frustrating. They aren't good listeners. It's hard for them to pay attention. And they've just discovered that if they cause a little disruption in the class, they don't have to listen anymore. So sometimes we see unexplained behavior problems. Now, how about reading? Why would language and reading problems co-occur with these auditory processing problems? And what we have to understand is that if a child had lots of colds when they were young, they could have had fluid in their middle ear during the brain setup period when it was setting up the maps for listening to speech sounds. Or if the child just had a few ear infections. Often the students I see in my own caseload have had 2 or 3 ear infections in the first year or year and a half of life. And that's a period of time when speech signals aren't getting into their brain through the ears very well. Sometimes we have these issues that run in families, that you have a dad or a mother or a uncle or an aunt or even a brother or sister who just seemed to have trouble learning language or had trouble, it seemed like, building listening skills, or maybe just had trouble learning to decode when they had to learn to read. And that could be a genetic influence. It could be a predisposition toward having a little bit of difficulty with perceiving speech sounds and learning aspects of tying those speech sounds to words and meaning for language and later for reading. Sometimes children just are the 5th child out of a family of 6, and mom works and dad works, and there just isn't a lot of time to talk and read to them. So that can be a factor. And then there are probably things we don't even know about, unknown factors that might influence some of this. An unknown factor might be noise in the environment, or it might be just something else. Now, to understand what an auditory processing problem is then, and then why that would lead to a language or reading problem, let's look at what your brain has to do to perceive speech sounds. What you're looking at here is what we call a speech map, or we're just looking at the physical characteristics of speech sounds. And what you can see on this particular slide is we have two speech sounds we're going to be listening for, ba and da, or looking at, really. And this particular image, you see three bands of energy. They're blue lines that have kind of little lines in them, but blue lines that are up at the top of our frequency part of the graph, at the very top of the graph, a blue line in the middle, and a blue line, two blue lines actually, at the bottom. Now, the information that we use to distinguish a ba from a da is in the very first tiny part of that blue line. And if you look at the bottom, if you look at the horizontal part of the graph down at the bottom, what you see is the number 0 and then 40 and then 280. Now, that's milliseconds. Milliseconds are a thousandth of a second. So it's important to see that a syllable like ba or da lasts for 280 milliseconds. It's not very long. That's just a little bit over a quarter of a second. So a syllable is about a quarter of a second long. And then if you look at the content, where that syllable changes to help us to distinguish a ba from a da, you can see that that's occurring in the first 40 milliseconds. That's really rapid. That's a 12th of a second long. So I have to hear very rapid changes, very subtle rapid changes to distinguish speech sounds in the English language. Now, what technology can do is it can stretch out that 280 milliseconds and double the length of time that transition occurs, that very rapid change that helps us to distinguish a ba from a da. So instead of it being 40 milliseconds, technology can change it so that it's 80 milliseconds and make it twice as loud. So you can make it twice as loud and twice as long, and that makes the speech easier to perceive. If the speech is easier to perceive, then the brain can start dealing with it and creating a map for those sounds. And we call that glasses for the ears. Glasses for the ears, then, is a way to make speech sounds more accessible to children who are having trouble with speech sound perception or auditory processing problems. Now, why would auditory processing problems be associated with reading difficulties? Well, what I want you to look at here is the reading brain. This is a relatively older slide. It's been around since the early 2000s. Turkel Taub et al. Published in Nature Reviews Neuroscience. But you can see in the upper left-hand corner, you have the brain, the left hemisphere, or the left side of the brain of a young reader. And what you'll see is a little butterfly-shaped red spot in the corner of the left hemisphere that links the hearing part of the brain to the seeing part of the brain. Now, that little butterfly then is a spot in the brain where children are hearing a sound and linking it to a letter that they see. So if they see a letter A, they're thinking ah or ah. If they see a letter O, they might be thinking O or aw. If they see a letter B, they might be thinking ba. And they might be able to sound out a word going b, o, k, book, because they can link those sounds to the letters and sound out a word. They're not comprehending much. They're not reading much for meaning yet. They're just decoding, and that's what that little butterfly shows us. But if you look to the right, you'll see adult readers don't have to decode as much. We don't have to sound words out. We don't have to sit and just sound words out sound by sound, unless it's a new word we've never seen before. We can go pretty much directly from sound to meaning, and you see all of that activity moves to the frontal lobe of the brain, that frontal part where all that red is activated, and that is us using what we read to learn, using what we read to think about new things, using what we read to follow directions so that we can put a new item together that we bought somewhere. so that we can read catalogs, so that we can read novels. So whenever you're using reading in any way, the frontal lobe's involved, and that's how the adult uses it. So a child has to go from this ability to decode to the ability to actually use reading to learn. And we say that a child goes from learning to read to reading to learn. But what I want you to see is with that little butterfly, it's dependent on the integrity of the auditory processing system because it's linking sound to letter. And so new research, both from two places really. One is from the American Speech Language Hearing Association, research that was just published in February of last year in the Journal of the Speech Language and Hearing Association Research Journal, found that auditory processing deficits were found prior to school entry in children who were later diagnosed with dyslexia. And the authors, as you can see here in this particular description, Chrisman, Lockman, and Steinbrink in 2015, said the results support the existence of a general auditory processing impairment in developmental dyslexia that might be the cause of the phonological problems, at least in a large set of persons with dyslexia. Now, my colleague at Northwestern, Nina Kraus, did a similar study, a little bit different though. What she did is you can see this bathing cap that she put on little 3-year-olds, 3 and 4-year-olds, and the little bathing cap has electrodes that are picking up brain waves so that you can tell if a child actually is perceiving a speech sound like a ba or a da, or if they're not, if their brain is registering it or if they're not registering it. And she put these bathing caps on 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, and she pumped into the room while they were playing with toys. They don't even have to listen. So while they're playing with dolls or trucks, she's pumping in a sound that they're listening to, like da, 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 da. And the sound might be just all by itself, or it might be in an environment with noise. So it might sound like this, da, 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 where it's a little noisy. And what she found is when those 3 and 4-year-olds had trouble perceiving the speech sounds in noise, and she followed them for 3 years, those children later on had phonological processing problems. They had trouble rhyming, and they had trouble figuring out the first letters of sounds, and those children go on often to have reading problems. May not be diagnosed necessarily as dyslexia, but definitely reading problems. So how do I know if with my child or a student I have, if those areas in the brain need boosting? How do I know if I need an intervention to help my child? Well, we'll go back to those original questions we asked. If your child says huh or what all the time, they just don't seem to be able to handle information coming at them auditorily, that is a sign that they could have an attention problem and or an auditory processing problem. If they have trouble learning the alphabet, math, facts, letter sounds, nursery rhymes, especially if they're auditory. So if they hear something and they have trouble remembering it and they need something visual to help them, that's an auditory working memory problem, and that often goes along with an auditory processing problem. And then finally, the big key for all of us, and somebody said, what question do I ask in an IEP meeting? And this is it. Is the child having trouble sounding out words? Are they having trouble with decoding, or did they have a history of speech sound production errors? Are these kids who were still making speech sound errors, mispronouncing words much later than other children? Any one of these, if you see a child with any one of these symptoms, you could recommend that child get a full auditory processing battery done to determine if the child does have an auditory processing disorder. Now let's talk about what you can do about this. That's why you're all here, and that's the most important thing. And what we know about auditory processing is that it can be exercised and practiced using glasses for the ears that can be available through technology. It can be used on an iPad. It can be used on a computer. The little exercises that are game-like to the child can be accessed online, so the child can just do 20 minutes or half an hour a day of exercises designed to build up this capacity to perceive speech sounds first with the speech sounds glasses for the ears so that the sounds are exaggerated, and then you withdraw those glasses so the child just can hear just as easily and perceive as easily as every other child. Now let's look at the evidence for that. A research paper published last year asked the question, a meta-analysis, is neuroscientific research useful for educators? And the authors concluded after reviewing the research that yes, because when you use neuroscience-based approaches, you can see changes both in brain function. The behavior can change. The child now can perceive the speech sounds, but you can also see that the brain itself has changed, that it's been augmented. And here's just an example of that. This is research done by Elise Temple at Stanford University. And Elise Temple had normal readers, you can see on the left, 35 of them, that she asked to do a rhyming task in an fMRI scanner. And on the right, you can see 35 children diagnosed with dyslexia. These were about 7-year-old children in the 2nd grade. And you can see when they were asked to do the rhyming test, even though they could rhyme, the same areas of the brain in the frontal lobe and in the temporal parietal region just didn't light up in the hearing parts of the brain and in the reading parts of the brain. They just weren't active. But after just 6 weeks of a neuroscience-based intervention for auditory processing, you can see those areas lighting up. So we can see a change in function, and at the same time we could go back and test those students' ability to read, which is what Nadine Gabe did and what Elise Temple did, and see that their behavior changes as well. So with that, let's just answer this question, and it'll lead into Lynn's discussion of where you can go for help if you'd like it. So answer this question for me. What area is most challenging right now? Is it homework? Is it reading? Is it writing? Or is it math? Again, which area in school is challenging for your student right now? Homework, reading, writing, or math? After you click it on, click the Submit button. And most of you are saying reading, and that would be a sign that, yes, that child probably does have some underlying auditory processing, auditory language-based issues. Writing could be a problem, math could be a problem, and doing homework could be slowed down because children take so long to get through the content and to remember what they're supposed to do. So I'll turn it over now to Lynn.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burns. I appreciate everything that you shared with us today. I think one of my favorite terms that you used was glasses for the ears. You know, we'll all take our children when we know that they have eye issues, but how do we correct that auditory processing? And all the research that you shared with us is very recent and very, very important. What I do with scientific learning is I work in the Fast Forward Home program. Fast Forward, again, as Dr. Burns stated, it's a program that will help improve the language and reading skills of your child, but we do it in a fun and engaging way. It's a service that's going to combine the Fast Forward program, you know, what we're known for, and the service of an educational online consultant. We always say no more Band-Aids on reading problems. You know, if your child has an IEP and they have pull-outs and they get extra time on tests and they get extra time to do reading, those are Band-Aids. What Fast Forward does is it combines the neuroscience technology and education. Right? This is what we need to get down to. How do we change those underlying issues for children? We take a much more comprehensive approach, and we work to improve all of those underlying cognitive foundation skills that are necessary for learning. And use of science and the technology really tells us that once the brain creates these pathways, once we improve those areas, the brain's wired now to process that information much more quickly and efficiently. And once it's wired, it stays wired, right? That's one of the big things that we know in neuroscience, right? All of those things that wire together will fire together, and the kids can get to that information much more quickly. And again, these are enduring, long-lasting improvements, right? It's not that you have to do this program and come back year after year and keep doing it. There's longitudinal research that shows once we've made those connections, your brain is smart enough to keep using them. We create a superhighway, and once we create that superhighway, your brain says, I'm going to jump on that now and use that path to get this information and use it more quickly and efficiently. And I know a lot of parents ask me, are we available on the iPad? No, we know the iPad's been around a long time, and yes, we are available on the iPad. You do have to have an internet connection. This is something that's not downloaded. It is a web-based program, but yes, we are definitely iPad accessible. And how the program works at home is it's totally flexible on your part. It's 5 days a week, 30 minutes a day for a 4-month time period. And that really truly is whatever time of day will work best for you and your child's schedule. You'll be assigned to work with an educational consultant throughout the entire process. They will provide you with very detailed weekly reports, and then you'll have regularly scheduled phone calls as well. And what we know, again, this is all based on neuroscience, is these results will come quickly. And those improvements, based on our longitudinal studies, show that those improvements continue going forward. This is a little example of what these exercises look like. So they are all character driven, right, because we know that's what appeals to children. On the left side of your screen, you will see the language series, which is for elementary age students. And then on the right-hand side, that is the series, the literacy, for middle through high school. Now, you're not limited really to high school. We actually do work with adults who find themselves struggling and maybe were undiagnosed themselves when they were in school. So we know really, again, the brain can be changed. It's plastic and can be changed at any age. Here is another one of our poll questions, and I really like this one. Which one of these best reflects what you'd like for your child? So you'd like for your child's brightness to show at school. I'd like my child to feel and know that he or she is smart and capable. I'd like my child to love and enjoy books. And I'd like my child to be more independent, able to organize themselves and complete tasks. So go ahead and click on the one that you feel best matches your child, and then click the Submit button. And then we'll go ahead and get the results from that. And wow, large percentage of you are saying that you would like your child to feel and know that he or she is smart and that they are capable of being a good student and reader. And then the other one that came into a very close second is I'd like my child to be more independent, to be able to organize themselves and complete tasks without being reminded. And I think as a parent, we all want that for our child. And that's called executive function skills. So let me go on to the next that we have here. One more poll question. Oh, that's our last poll question. But here's our contact information. You can definitely dial our 800 number, our 88 number that you see on the screen, or you can please visit our Fast Forward Home website. It is a new website. It's got a lot of parent resources. In addition to the Fast Forward information, it has information on dyslexia, auditory processing, any number of things that you need. I really do appreciate everyone's time this afternoon. I think that Carrie is now going to be opening that up to Q&A. But again, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much, Lynn and Dr. Burns. Let's see here. So the first question that came in, and it came in before we even started the webinar, so I'd like to have Dr. Burns address that first. And the person who asked me the question, I want to make sure I understood it. So basically, what are some of the symptoms to look for when we are looking at, I think we addressed some of the issues around auditory processing disorder, but this, I guess the person is asking more about, would this child then qualify for an IEP if they have an auditory processing disorder? Any thoughts on that, Dr. Burns?
Okay, so, IEP criteria are established by state boards of education. So there is some variability from state to state. You can talk to the special education director in your school district and find out what the criteria are for children receiving an IEP. Some school districts do provide IEPs for auditory processing disorders. Others, the child might fall under another classification, like a speech and language issue or a reading issue. So again, that would be a question you'd want to ask your special ed director of your school district. Or if your child is seeing a speech language pathologist, you can ask them. Or if you have an IEP meeting scheduled for your child because there are other learning issues, you can talk to the individuals in your school who are organizing the IEP meeting or scheduling it and ask them what procedures you would want to follow. But the big question is, there are two issues here. One is if the school has an audiologist on staff that does audiological hearing testing in the school, that audiologist might be able to do an auditory processing evaluation. But very often that audiologist only does hearing screenings to identify students who might need hearing aids. So some school districts would refer out to an audiologist who specializes in auditory processing testing. Now, some school districts offer amplification devices for children either that have auditory processing disorders or where screening tests that are given, sometimes by a speech-language pathologist, suggest the child might have auditory processing issues. So your school district might have access to those amplification devices, and if so, you can talk to whoever determines that. It might be a psychologist who does the testing. It might be a special ed teacher that does the testing. It might be a speech and language pathologist, and find out what the avenue is for more detailed or more thorough testing if you would like that. And if the school does do amplification, this is a very long answer, but it's a pretty complex issue. But if your school does use amplification, you would want to find out if they also would be using interventions like ForWord auditory training interventions.
Wonderful.
So very long answer for a very short question.
I know. I thought. Thank you for that comprehensive answer. Next question that came in, I'm trying to do these in order. We've got about 10 minutes for questions right now. If we don't get to your question, please email me at webinars@signlearn.com. So can overall processing speed or CPI increase if the auditory processing issues are treated?
Yes, so processing speed is a measure of what Lynn was talking about, those superhighways and how efficient they are. Your brain, regions of the brain have to communicate with each other, and that's what processing is. And whenever you're learning anything new, just think about the first time you took a piano lesson, if you ever did, and how slowly you played. The reason you played slowly and the reason your scales were slow and the reason it took you forever to read music is because those processing pathways were slow and you were learning. And then as you got better and better and practiced, you got faster and more efficient. Well, that speed of processing is a measure of brain efficiency. So when we see a child is processing slowly, it means those fiber tracts are not well exercised and aren't efficient, and the auditory training is what builds up that efficiency. The ForWord programs, that's what they're designed to do.
Okay, next question is, my daughter is 29 years old, diagnosed as autistic at age 6 or 7. How correctable are her challenges?
The children on the autism spectrum often have auditory processing disorders. There's some excellent research on that out of Northwestern University. Again, my colleague Nina Krause and some of her colleagues have done quite a bit of good research on that. And they do respond to ForWord, the auditory processing disorder, and the language disorder at any age. The brain is plastic at all ages. So at any age, you can see changes. But if you use ForWord products, what you will see is changes in auditory processing, auditory language skills. You may want to use other interventions for some of the other components of autism spectrum disorders, social skills, and things of that sort.
Okay, next question is, and we had this question at our last webinar on the same topic. Is there any way I can have my child's brain scan? And I remember you answered this before. I don't remember your answer, but.
Yeah. So the way that you scan, there are many different technologies to scan the brain. One is fMRI, functional brain imaging. That's what you saw those pictures of Elise Temple before and after ForWord. That's called an fMRI scan. Functional magnetic resonance. You can also have what's called a DTI scan, which is how thick the myelin is in the brain in those superhighways. You can also have measures done of cortical thickness, the thickness on the outer side of the brain. All of those measures give us different information. But here's the caveat. They're all still research measures. They are not diagnostic measures. So functional scanning of any kind, whether it's fMRI, diffusion tensor imaging, DTI, where you're looking at myelination of fiber tracts, or whether you're looking at thickness of the cortex, those are used still in research environments. The only way you would get a scan of your child like that would be if you actually went to a research hospital and participated in a research project. But that said, you can have these electrode studies done that you saw Nina Kraus use with the bathing cap that can look at auditory processing from an electrophysiological standpoint. You don't see the nice pretty brain when you look at it. You see waves, and that's what they look for. But it can give you a great deal of very specific information, and that is available clinically, and that is available for use by audiologists to assess auditory processing disorders.
Okay, here's the next question, and this is a really interesting question. In addition to FastForward, are there any other evidence-based auditory training and treatment that can be used with our kids with CAPD?
All right, so one other program that has been developed that's out there was developed by Frank Music, and that's spelled not like M-U-S-I-C, not like music, but it looks like Musiac. You can go online and look that up. It is an auditory processing program that was developed for CAPD specifically. It isn't quite as comprehensive as FastForward. It doesn't work on language skills. It doesn't work on reading skills. It doesn't work on working memory per se. It's purely just auditory discrimination exercises. And that's the only one right now. The only other program that's been developed, technological program for auditory processing disorders that I'm aware of.
And so the next question is, and this is a pretty common occurrence, can you use FastForward along with, in conjunction with the listening program or other programs?
Yes. Now, the listening program and other what we call listening programs, so you've got Tomatis, you've got Sonomus. There are several different, quote, listening programs out there that involve what we call passive listening. A child puts headphones on, they hear music that's been filtered in different ways, and that passive listening experience is designed to improve some components of listening. Specifically, it's designed, the listening program, to desensitize a child from being hypersensitive to certain loud noises and things like that. There are speech-language pathologists who use a listening program of one kind or another prior to using FastForward, just to kind of tune up the brain to get ready for FastForward. That's an option, and some people do use that, some clinicians. You'd want to talk to the clinician about whether they use it, whether they recommend that, and what their success rate is with that.
Great. Let's see here. Next question is, we've got a few questions on this same topic. So basically, what age can FastForward be used at? What is the minimum competency needed? So that'll handle about 5 questions from folks in here.
Okay, so children can use the FastForward programs beginning as young as about 3 to 3.5 years of age. It is accessible on an iPad. We do have some preschool intervention programs and some data on using it with younger children. Generally speaking, for a child to use it independently, you want to start thinking about 5 years of age, but different children are going to have different competency levels, so that's a really good question. A child needs to have about a 3-year comprehension of language capacity. They have to know their colors, they have to know shapes a little bit, they have to be able to follow auditory directions fairly well. They have to be able to sit and listen for 10 minutes at a time and do a task on an iPad, for example, for 10 minutes at a time and respond consistently without getting up and walking around. So their attention level has to be good enough that they can do 10 minutes at one sitting. And you can break it up and if they do a half an hour of fast forward, for example, they can do 3 10-minute sections, but they need to be able to do that for 10 minutes. And they need to have the skills to either use a computer mouse if they're doing it on a computer, or the tablet skills of sweeping and touching the screen to be able to use it on an iPad or other tablet.
Okay, and so for Lynn, are you with us?
I sure am, Carrie.
Question. Beautiful. Can you talk a little bit more about how the program is structured, cost options, et cetera, those types of questions, just more like how do people possibly get started, you know?
Sure. So the first thing is, if you're already working with one of the Fast Forward Home educational consultants, email them or give them a call. We like to do an initial interview. We want to talk to you about your child. We want to find out what other interventions you've done. We just want to make sure that Fast Forward is going to be the appropriate intervention for your child. So that would be the first thing. If you're not currently working with somebody, please go to the Fast Forward Home website that you see on the screen right now. You can go there and you can fill out information, and someone will contact you, or again, you can use that number and call directly in, and you will get to speak with one of our sales representatives. We position this as a 4-month subscription. The pricing right now, I'll give you our normal pricing. It's a one-time fee of $1,500 that covers the subscription, but in addition to that subscription, it also covers the work of the consultant, so the one-on-one person who will be in contact with you on a weekly basis. Throughout the year, we do have specials. We just concluded one of our specials for summer, and we will probably have another one coming up this winter. Did I cover all of those areas, Carrie?
Yes, you did. Thank you so much. We've got several questions on that, so that really was great. Actually, repeat the cost, if you would, and what's included in that. Someone's asking that.
Sure, absolutely. It is a 4-month subscription to the website. And what's included in that subscription really are unlimited levels that your child would be able to complete. It includes a minimum of 30 minutes a day. You could also access the program up to 90 minutes a day. And you can actually do more than 5 days a week. So you've got this subscription, it's kind of a wide open subscription. And then you'll have your own one-on-one consultant. That person, again, will be emailing you the very data-rich weekly reports. And then you'll have regularly scheduled phone calls with that individual as well. And that is $1,500. Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. And that, I want to qualify that. That is for the U.S. and Canada. If you are outside of the U.S. and Canada, please contact me, Carrie, directly at webinars@scilearn.com because we have providers that sell this all around the world, and it's different countries and different providers. So I do want to qualify that statement. School costs vary, so the person asking me that question, I'll follow up with you after the webinar. It's based on how many kids you purchase and how many students you want to use for the pricing. So please contact me directly. Let's see here. And so, Lynn, here's another question, and Dr. Burns can answer as well. Is the 4 months enough time for the program to make a difference?
We see on average it takes children between 4 and 6 months to get through their levels of the program. One of the things about Fast Forward, and I don't know that we've mentioned this, and Marty could chime in on this if she wants. Fast Forward is a fast program, right? It needs to be intense. It needs to be completed in a shortest amount of time period per your child's abilities, because that's the way we most effectively make the changes in the brain, right? So 4 to 6 months is the average that we see. And again, our goal is to have them done in the shortest amount of time period because that is the most effective way to make those really strong neural pathways.
I'll just add
Dr.
that,
Burns?
Yeah, that how long it takes depends on your child. It depends on, if you have a child that has a pretty severe auditory processing problem with some language problems and reading problems, it might take a little longer. It might take 6 months. It might take 8 months to get through the programs you want your child to go through. You might have some children that are middle school children, middle school or early high school or a young adult who just has a few residual problems left, and they can zip through fairly quickly, maybe 2 or 3 months. So it all depends on, this is exercises adapt to your child. Every single keystroke, it's adapting to your child. Do they need more practice at that level, or can they move on to the next level? So for children who have several issues, it's going to take a little longer than children who are very mild and just want to fine-tune their skills. But it will be effective no matter how long it takes. And if your child takes a little longer, no worries. Your child will end up achieving and getting through the same levels ultimately that they need to get through.
Okay, so we're going to take 1 or 2 more questions today. And if we didn't get to your questions, please email me at webinars@scilearn.com. I'll also be going through all the questions at the end. I have a transcript of the questions that have come in. So I will make sure Lynn and her team address the questions, or that Dr. Burns addresses the questions, or I'll address them. So great questions today. One more question I will take with for Dr. Burns. And if Dr. Burns could repeat the other auditory program that you mentioned,
okay,
other than Fast Forward, that could be used?
So it's a program. I don't know what the exact title of it. I would have to go back and check, but you can do an online search of this. It was developed by Frank Music, and it's M-U-S-I-E-K, I believe, or M-U-S-I-A-K. It looks like Musiac. And I believe he's at University of Connecticut, and I know it's been developed, and I think it's available for usage now. I just don't happen to have that information on my desk right in front of me. But if you do a web search of his name and just type in his name and then type in auditory processing program, I think you'll be able to get access to that. I know it was developed about a year ago and made available 6 months or so ago, so it's been out there a while.
Okay, last question. We have so many questions. We will get back to you in some way. One of us will get back to you in the next few days. Great questions coming in, though. Last question. Is this program successful for hearing impaired children?
Most children that have hearing impairments have auditory processing problems because the hearing impairment has interfered with their ability to get a clear signal to the brain. And auditory processing problems result when you don't get a clear signal to the brain. We call those kind of muddy maps. So yes, children with hearing impairments usually have auditory processing problems. The big question is, what kind of hearing impairment does your child have? The first thing you want to do is make sure the hearing impairment itself is corrected. That is, that you have the right kind of hearing aid, or that you have a cochlear implant, or that you have handled the hearing impairment as well as possible. Then once that occurs, auditory training is part of oral rehab. For every child who gets a hearing aid, you do auditory training to enhance their auditory processing skills. And Fast Forward has been used with many children with hearing impairments. And there's an excellent study of the research that was done out of Johns Hopkins University with children with cochlear implants. So that could be made available to you if you wanted to see that.
Okay, wonderful. So we have a lot more questions to go through. We're going to get answers to all of these questions for you in the next, I'd say, give us a few days to kind of go through these questions. And between me, Dr. Burns, and Lynn, we will get back to you on all of these questions. This was a wonderful webinar. I hope you all enjoyed it. The one question I do want to address is I have gotten several questions about the recording of this. Feel free to, once you receive it in the next day or so, feel free to send it around to people that might also be interested. I got that question several times, so you'll be getting this in your email. Be on the lookout for an email from us with a link to the recording. So again, I want to thank Dr. Burns for her time. I want to thank Lynn for her time, and I hope you all enjoyed our webinar and hope to see you online again soon. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.